Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of UBS Road to the Election and Election Watch series. Today, we are going to pivot just a little bit and take a look at arts and visual media's historic influences on politics and elections. I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, Dr. Mary Schmidt-Campbell. Dr. Campbell, it's so nice to have you here. As I said to you right before we started, this is a nice little pivot for us to get away from the really political side and the investment implications, something that's just as important, but from a slightly different angle. So good to have you here.
Well, good to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. So interestingly, one of the things that, we have different phases of history to go through together. And by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, there was a lot of rapid technological change in printmaking. The ability that people didn't have, just a few years before that became real. And you were starting to see images and pictures of, for one thing, politicians. So talk about how radical that was and what it was that you see in looking at the history of that is so important.
Well, what emerged at the end of the 19th century, or in the second half of the 19th century, was just an explosion of mass media and printmaking techniques. So you had lithographs, you had woodcuts, you had etching, and of course, even before the Civil War, you had photography. So a media publication could not only have articles written for the literate, it could have these wonderful visuals that anybody could take advantage of, and that's when you see the emergence of political cartoons.
It's interesting because you make a really good point. Not everyone at that point, the education wasn't common and equal across the board. Some would say that was the case even today, but at that point, to have a picture, it really spoke 1,000 words.
Absolutely.
Right. There's actually an interesting quote from Machiavelli, who was one of the major political strategists during the Renaissance, and he said, and I'll read this quote, he said, "Leaders do not necessarily need to have good qualities, but it is absolutely necessary for them to appear to have them." And so,
oh, I love that. I'm gonna steal that.
I will send it to you. And I found that as I was prepping to sit with you today, all these quotes and these things came up, and I said, you know what? It's so powerful. We take for granted images because we're so used to them, but here they are, and they really are saying so much about what we perceive to be successful, not successful, smart, not as smart, especially in the political world.
Right. And so at the end of the 19th century, it became possible to do political cartoons, for example, and Thomas Nast was hands down the most brilliant political cartoonist, and I have to say these were some pretty hard-hitting cartoons. So when Grant ran for president in 1868, he was a Republican candidate. He had just helped win the Civil War, and Nast pictures him as a very dignified war hero with a top hat on and a suit, and all around him the trappings of a heroic war hero. Now, his opponent, or one of his opponents, was Horace Seymour, who had been governor of New York. And Seymour, unfortunately, during the draft riots of 1863, helped instigate those riots. So Nast pictures him with literally his hair shaped in horns, as if he's Satan, and all around him the death and destruction that came about during those Civil War riots. A man lynched, an orphanage burned, a young child dying at his feet. So you put these two images side by side and you say, which one would you like for president?
Seems like an obvious choice, doesn't it?
Right.
But the power, and Nast, of course, is famous for his, and I actually think this is true, that the word nasty derived from his name. I might have to fact check that, but I'm pretty sure it's true.
Well, it sounds good.
It's not just the Janet Jackson song from the 80s.
Right.
It literally is the way that he portrayed folks in his cartoons.
Yes.
Were hyper-realistic in the sense as you described, with these metaphors and these images around them that he wanted to paint a picture of.
And the difference is very stark.
Yes,
Yes.
Absolutely. So if we fast forward then from images or even wood etchings and carvings to finally television ads. Now today, you and I can sit here and say, oh, political ads, they're everywhere. They're all over my TV, my computer, even on the radio when I'm driving to work. But back in the early 50s and 40s, not everybody had television, so they were just starting to come into play. So how did that become part of what we know today as the zeitgeist of political ads?
Well, the first president to really use political ads was Dwight Eisenhower in the campaign of 1952, again, a Republican candidate. And at that time, about 40% of the American public had televisions. Well, that didn't mean that just 40% watched. It mean your neighbors came down the street and your friends came over to watch. But the ads are so sweet and so benign and so kind that you almost can't recognize them as political ads.
I'm laughing over here because you don't usually use political ads and benign in the same sentence unless you're saying opposite day.
Right.
Because, and we were talking about this earlier, back in 1960, during the Kennedy versus Nixon campaign, I guess it's considered the first negative political ad, all Kennedy's campaign did was post a video of Eisenhower saying, what did you think about the ideas that Nixon contributed as vice president? He was quoted as saying, if you give me a week, I might think of one. And so that's all Kennedy's team had to do, and ergo, that was
Right.
very successful for him.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. No, they're much kinder. They were much kinder then than they are now. But the Eisenhower ad was even went more. The lyrics were something like, "I like Ike, you like Ike, we like Ike," and then it just names his opponents and says, "We don't want them. We want Ike."
So they led with positivity.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And it was animated.
It was. But that is certainly not the same today when
No.
you look at these political ads.
No.
And it's such a departure from that kind of kinder, gentler
Right.
type of stalwartness.
Right. I think things started to heat up when we went to the whole format of political debates. And as you mentioned, Nixon and Kennedy were opponents in 1960. And those debates really did demonstrate, just visually through the medium of television, the differences between the two. If you look at them they sit one on either side of the commentator. Kennedy's in a dark suit, dark socks and shoes. He has a beautiful dark tie on with a white shirt, a little pocket square. And he's sitting back relaxed with his hands folded. And he just looks the picture of confidence and comfort. Nixon has on a light suit. It's slightly crumpled. He's slouching in his chair. He's got a 5 o'clock shadow. Somebody has misadvised this poor man because, by contrast, he does not look presidential. He does not look like a leader. And it is a superb example of how a visual image, in and of itself, through the medium of television, at a time when 90% of American families had television sets, can really convey, almost without saying anything, a certain sense of who deserves to be your leader.
It is fascinating. Esme, our producer of the show, reminded me that during the Reagan administration, when he would go to Russia to sit with Gorbachev, Reagan was the same thing, probably taking the page out of Kennedy's book, suit, very classic looking, and Gorbachev's there with his big hat and kind of frumpy with a big coat. And so it's the same idea.
Exactly.
And I'm sure it was invented by the Kennedy campaign in the advent of TV,
Yes.
really dictating who we were going to vote for.
Right, right.
Crazy stuff. And so here we go again. The next advent, of course, is social media, where even before we began today, both of us kind of rolled our eyes at each other. Social media takes immersion into another level where everybody now is a political commentator. You know, from your 12-year-old niece to your grandmother, everybody could say whatever they feel based in truth or not. So certainly social media has literally changed the face of politics.
Absolutely. Well, one of the big changes is that you know, a political ad most often is invented by the campaign or a political action committee that is, you know, an ally of the campaign, right? What's interesting about social media is that all of a sudden the means to create the media is in the hands of the people. And the most dramatic example of that is the Yes We Can video that the rapper will.i.am created from Obama's concession speech when he lost the New Hampshire primary to Hillary Clinton. You know, he gave this beautiful speech on that occasion. And here this rapper is listening to it. He takes an excerpt from it. He gets artists of all shapes and colors, black, white, Asian, Latino, classical music, country music, jazz music. He puts just this incredibly diverse universe together. And he uses the excerpt of that video to make a point about not just the candidate, but the values we cherish as Americans. I was sitting in my study in 2008, and somebody sent this to me, and I immediately sent it to my husband, right? So already you can see that the distribution is in my hands, in the
Right.
hands of the citizens. My husband shares it with somebody at an event, a very sophisticated PR person. And he says, as she's watching it, he's watching tears come down her eyes. And he says, watching her, he said, oh my gosh, this can move people to do something. And I thought that was truly revolutionary in terms of using medium. Now, did Will.i.am ask for permission? No. Did the Obama campaign have the good sense to say, I'm just going to let this go? Yes, because
Right.
within days, 26 million people had watched it.
I remember it was very impactful on
Very.
every level.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily social media, but I am always taken back to me being a young voter and watching, then candidate Governor Bill Clinton playing the saxophone on Arsenio Hall. They knew the audience they were going to get. It was
Right.
that, the early voters, the 20, 30-somethings who were
Right.
watching late night TV. Arsenio was the show at the time.
That's
He
right.
gets on, shows how quote-unquote cool he is by playing the sax. And some historians say it really helped him to win the vote, especially with younger voters, which at the time, they were
Right.
not showing up. And then the Rock the Vote campaign and MTV, you could sort of see how media really does play such an important role in getting people to get out there and actually really care. But again, with social media, as you said, it puts the power in the hands of the people. And something what you
Exactly.
just described was really magnificent in a time before social media really exploded.
Yes, and also, as you observed, it puts the power in the hands of young people. I mean, we have statistics now that tell us definitively that in that 18 to 34 age group, that's where citizens feel most disengaged from politics, from what's going on, from the issues, the candidates, everything. So the ability for candidates to somehow reach that group is really potent.
Very powerful if you can
Yes.
get them to really care
Absolutely.
about the issues and care enough to get out there and vote. You'll definitely attract them to the polls. Dr. Campbell, thank you. I know I feel like we've only scratched the surface here. We should do a part 2 with you, but it's fascinating, great stuff, and this again is such a nice departure from some of the more hard-hitting things we discuss here on the show. So great, thanks for being with us.
Oh, great to be here. Thank
Great,
you.
excellent. We'd love to get you back soon.
Thank
And
you.
thank you all for watching. For more information and more content on the election coming up, especially from our UBS CIO, visit our website at ubs.com/election watch. You'll find all of the episodes of this series there, plus other content. And there will be new content coming out over the next couple of months before and after the election. And please, we encourage you to continue this conversation with your financial advisor. Even this art one, I think they'd be fascinated to know what you're finding out from Dr. Campbell. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. We hope you have a great day, everybody. We'll see you soon.